The night 6,000 planes were almost grounded. The A320 meltdown nobody saw coming. The night began like any other. Runway lights cut clean, unwavering lines through the darkness, stretching out like illuminated arteries feeding the global body of aviation. Control towers hummed with familiar voices, calm, procedural, precise. There was no urgency in their tone, no hint of the storm quietly forming beneath layers of code and logic. In cockpits scattered across continents, pilots performed checklists they had memorized long ago, their hands moving with mechanical confidence, guided by years of repetition and trust. Trust in the aircraft, trust in the systems, trust in the idea that everything would behave the way it always had. At 38,000 feet, the Airbus A320 does not feel fragile. It feels deliberate, controlled, almost alive. Its fly-by-wire systems interpret pilot inputs through layers of logic faster than human thought. Its computers calculate airspeed, angle of attack, fuel flow, navigation accuracy, and aircraft attitude thousands of times per second. To the people inside, the aircraft feels like certainty made metal. But certainty can be deceptive. Welcome back to HyperFlight Saga, the home of extreme aviation, impossible engineering, and the machines that stretch the very boundaries of what humans can build. Subscribe, sit tight, and let's uncover this story together. Because somewhere deep inside the digital bloodstream of global aviation, something shifted. Not violently, not dramatically, just enough to be noticed by machines trained to distrust even the smallest inconsistency. A number didn't agree with another number. A reference value failed to align with expectation. A silent disagreement began to spread. In one cockpit, a pilot frowned at a navigation display that froze for half a second too long, not long enough to trigger a warning, but long enough to register as wrong. In another, an autopilot disengaged with a soft chime, the kind of sound pilots are trained to respect, but not fear. No alarms followed, no flashing lights, just silence where confidence used to be. Maintenance logs began populating with warnings that pointed to nothing specific. No system declared failure. No component exceeded limits. Everything reported itself as within tolerance, yet nothing felt entirely right. The aircraft were still flyable. The engines were still powerful. The wings were still strong. But modern aviation does not run on confidence. It runs on permission, and permission was quietly being withdrawn. Airline dispatchers stared at screens filled with alerts that didn't align with reality. Systems that had never spoken to each other directly were suddenly echoing the same uncertainty. Fault codes appeared, vanished, then reappeared somewhere else entirely. Each airline assumed the issue was local, a database hiccup, a delayed update, a temporary glitch. Each believed it would pass. They were wrong. Across continents, the same hesitation appeared. Airbus A320s, the backbone of short and medium-haul travel, were held at gates, not by mechanics with tools, but by logic, by digital rulebooks that allowed no ambiguity. The aircraft themselves were healthy, but health no longer mattered. Passengers grew restless as boarding stalled without explanation. Crews waited, duty clocks ticking forward with ruthless precision. Some pilots remained seated in cockpits long after scheduled departure, listening to the faint whine of avionics cooling fans, watching clocks inch towards limits they could not exceed. These were men and women trained for chaos, engine failures, fire warnings, rapid decompressions, electrical smoke in the cockpit, They trained relentlessly for emergencies that arrived loudly and violently. No one had trained them for this: a crisis without drama, a failure without damage, a grounding without a visible cause. As midnight passed, airline operations centers transformed into war rooms. Engineers joined emergency calls from living rooms, hotel rooms, and airport offices. Some were woken by vibrating phones, others never slept at all. Screens filled with data streams, logs, and system states scrolling endlessly. Every system insisted it was operating correctly. And yet, the limits themselves had become the problem. Because the Airbus A320 is not a single machine. It is a conversation. Air data computers cross-check pressure and temperature against inertial reference units measuring acceleration and position. Flight management systems negotiate with navigation databases that define where the aircraft believes it is and where it is allowed to go. Autopilot logic continuously verifies its own authority by confirming agreement across multiple channels. None of them fully trusts the others, and that mistrust is intentional. It is safety by suspicion. But when suspicion spreads too far, the system protects itself in the only way it knows. It stops. By now, realization had begun to form. If the inconsistency could not be isolated quickly, the world would wake up to empty skies. 6,000 aircraft, hundreds of millions of dollars lost per day, millions of passengers stranded, entire schedules collapsing like dominoes. All dependent on agreement between machines. Air traffic controllers began to notice something strange. The usual late-night wave of short-haul flights thinned. Frequencies grew quieter. Radar screens looked wrong, not because they were overloaded, but because they were empty. Silence replaced motion. Inside terminals, exhaustion turned into confusion. Families slept curled around carry-on bags. Business travelers refreshed email inboxes that contained no answers. Announcements repeated apologies without explanations behind them. The public saw inconvenience. The industry saw vulnerability. Because this wasn't weather. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't pilot error. It was the system protecting itself from something it could not fully understand. And that was the most unsettling part. For decades, aviation had marched toward more automation, more integration, more shared digital infrastructure. Software updates traveled across borders in seconds. Navigation databases synchronized globally. Fleets behaved less like individual aircraft and more like nodes in a massive network. That night exposed the cost of that evolution. A flaw no one could see had the power to freeze the sky. Engineers traced signals backward like forensic analysts, reconstructing a crime scene without a body. Every change was tested, simulated, rolled back, and re-examined. Every fix carried the weight of lives waiting on the other side of the gate. Because restarting the system without certainty wasn't an option. In aviation, almost safe is not safe. Eventually, just before dawn, alignment returned. Confidence metrics stabilized. Cross-checks fell back into tolerance. Permissions were restored. One by one, aircraft were released. Engines roared back to life. Taxiways filled again. The sky inhaled. By morning, most passengers would never know how close the system had come to stopping entirely. Flights resumed. Schedules repaired themselves as best they could. Headlines moved on. But the aviation industry did not, because something had been revealed that could never be unseen. The Airbus A320 had not failed. It had done exactly what it was designed to do. It had refused to fly without trust. And in doing so,
it forced a question that now hangs over the future of flight. What happens when the safest aircraft in history depends on systems so complex that even their creators must pause before saying, yes, it's safe? As artificial intelligence edges closer to the cockpit, as autonomy increases, as machines are given more authority over human lives, that night stands as a warning. The sky is no longer conquered by strength alone. It is negotiated, line by line, signal by signal, decision by decision. And sometimes, in the darkest hours, the machines hesitate. But here's the part almost no one talks about. In the internal reports that followed, investigators discovered something chilling. The trigger wasn't a hardware failure. It wasn't corrupted memory. It wasn't even a traditional software bug. It was a perfectly valid update, a change that followed every rule, passed every test, signed off by humans. The system didn't fail because something went wrong. It failed because everything went right, just not in the same way everywhere at once. Different aircraft, different operational environments, different interpretations of the same logic. The machines disagreed, politely, and the disagreement was enough. Which leads to the uncomfortable truth the industry rarely admits. The next grounding might not come from a mistake. It might come from logic itself. So here's the question, and this is where you come in. If you were on that flight at 38,000 feet, would you want the aircraft to obey a human pilot who feels it's safe, or a machine that refuses to fly because it isn't absolutely sure? Tell us in the comments, because the answer may decide how the future of flight is written. If you want more stories that reveal what really happens behind cockpit doors and control rooms, subscribe to HyperFlight Saga. And remember, the next time your flight is delayed without explanation, it might not be weather. It might be the machine.